What is up, Pitt fans? Thank you so much for tuning in to Inside the Panthers on YouTube. My name is Stephen Thompson, coming at you with another Inside Pitt practice report after the Panthers finished up their second practice of the spring. Spring ball practice number 2 is now in the books. Panthers moved indoors because of the rain, and there are plenty of notes from practice and from our interviews with certain with a selection of players, a selection of pretty heavy hitters, and it's kind of where I want to start. I want to start with the last thing I did before leaving the UPMC Rooney Sports Complex. So let's jump right into it. Our guests today, the ones that we got to sit down with, have a conversation with, were running back Rodney Hammond, Gavin Bartholomew, the tight end, and linebacker Brandon George, along with safety Javon McIntyre. But I want to focus on those first three guys because those three guys, if you had told me at the end of the season that they would, if you wanted me to give you odds on whether all three of those guys would be back in blue and gold in 2024, I wouldn't have given you great odds. I thought, at least one of those guys would have left the program. I thought Hammond and Bartholomew were pretty prime candidates. George to a lesser extent, but that his transfer wasn't necessarily shocking either as a fifth-year guy. Um, but we got sucked in the day. They are all back. They are going to play for the Panthers in 2024. They will give it one last ride. Uh, and it's a little surprising, but I think we got some interesting insight into what they saw in Pitt and why they made the decisions to return because they all kind of had some different reasons. I think we can start with Rodney Hammond, and I get the sense from Rodney he has a pretty unique personality, not only on this team but kind of in college football at large. I think he's a throwback player a little bit. I think he's a little more old school than a lot of other. I guess Rodney's probably 21 or 22 now. Than a lot of guys his age, and a lot of guys of his kind of talent, and a lot of guys who have produced at his level. I know his production wasn't what many expected when he came into 2023 as the top tailback on the roster, but for Hammond, I got the sense, and he said this pretty specifically, that it was about pride, really, coming back to Pitt. He had a bad taste in his mouth from 2023 and from going 3-9 and from having the kind of statistical season that he did. I'll read you this quote from him. I can say that we didn't want to leave business unfinished. A lot of us didn't want to leave with that bad rep on our name. You can't just go out there 3-9 and when stuff gets tough, you leave. No, I'm not that type of person. I believe that everyone else who came out, they're not that type of people. So when stuff gets bad, we're going to stay down until we come up. There's a commitment here. There's a sense of pride. There's a sense that, Hammond still has work to do here, which is interesting. And I mean, this all kind of comes with the caveat that Hammond did shout out Alliance 412, Pitt's NIL collective, in his announcement on Twitter that he was going to return to Pitt. So I don't think that was an insignificant portion of the decision as well. But I don't think this is either. I mean, you listen to Hammond talk, there is a conviction to his voice, there is a clarity of purpose too. He's angry, he's upset, he is disappointed in himself, and that for a guy who has only seen success since he's been at Pitt. I mean, his freshman year was the 2021 ACC championship season. He was the running back 2 on that roster. He was a guy who was closing out a lot of games for the Panthers, and then obviously in 2022 they enter the year ranked, have a lull in the middle of the season. He goes through some injuries, and then as he comes back, the team really heats up and they finish the year really strong. And of course, he earns Sun Bowl MVP honors after scoring 2 touchdowns in that big win over UCLA. For a guy like Hammond, who has only known winning, who has only known success, last year must have been jarring. And I think it's pretty remarkable that, like I said, I'm sure NIL money was involved to a certain extent, but that I don't know. There was going to be NIL money no matter where Ronnie Hammond went. He was going to get paid by someone. He is certainly a Power Five caliber running back, a Power Five starter at a lot of different places, and I just think it's notable that through all of that, he still kind of hung on to this idea that I owe something more to this place. And Bartholomew echoed that to a certain extent, but I think there was a little bit of a different tone as well because Bartholomew is like Hammond, someone who was probably underutilized in last year's offense, and sees a new opportunity in this new scheme that Cade Bell is going to run. Bartholomew is putting a lot of trust into Bell and to by extension Pat Narduzzi, who hired Cade Bell. to get him involved and to get him ready for the next level and get his tape out there. Because I will not be the first one to tell you this. I'm sure I'm not the first one to tell you this, that Bartholomew, every time he touched the ball, was pretty electric for the Panthers, but he didn't get the ball very often, and we heard so much about, oh, we got to get him the ball more from the coaches. We got to find ways to get him open, and it just never materialized. And then he misses the last two games of the season with an injury. It was a rough season, and for a guy whose freshman year started with so much promise, even on a loaded, even as the backup tight end, he was making plays, he was scoring touchdowns, he was involved. To see him get older, to see him, you know, still have that same explosiveness and maybe even get better and still not be a part of the offense, I'm sure that was disappointing as well. But he told us very point blank that he had conversations with Pat Narduzzi and Cade Bell about how he felt like he wasn't, as he put it, he didn't want to sound selfish, but he didn't feel like he was helping the team as much as he could. He knows he's a dynamic playmaker and that he wants the ball and that he can do explosive things with the ball, but he needs the ball, and talking to Cade Bell as well earlier in the offseason, I think he recognizes that as well. Um, and I think he's drawing up some stuff to do that for Bartholomew. And he seems to have a lot of confidence that that's going to be true, if not from what he said to us, by the fact that he is still at Pitt. I think that reflects a lot of confidence in this scheme's ability to help him live up to his potential. And he also did echo the Hammond sentiment about that this team is hungry and it has an edge to them, and that 3-9 is unacceptable, and that is not what this program is, or and it is not what they want this program to be known as. So both of these guys, I feel like, not only have a chip on their shoulder from their own production last season, but also have a chip on their shoulder being Pitt guys who have seen so much success. These guys came in the same recruiting class, and like I said before, 2023, they knew nothing but winning. This was a bit of a shock to the system, and you could hear you can call it anger, you can call it determination, but conviction that 3-9 wasn't going to happen again, and they were going to be back to make sure of it. Brandon George was a little bit of a different animal altogether. This was a guy who was here for 5 years, been mostly a reserve for the vast majority of his time in Pitt. I think he's a starting caliber guy. Like, you would feel throughout his career, you would feel really comfortable putting him in a starting lineup. You wouldn't feel like you lost anything if you had to replace, a Shane Simon with a Brandon George. There is certainly a drop off, but not one that is significant enough to make you feel like George can't cut at this level. He did enter the transfer portal. Bartholomew and Hammond did not. He seriously considered leaving. He said he had options to go to different places, but that he was kind of turned off by the recruiting process. He felt like he was, as he put it, being blown smoke to. He thought coaches were pretty much lying to him to try to get him to buy what they were selling. And the way he tells it, he felt like there it was a family atmosphere at Pitt. There was an emotional connection with his coaches and with the teammates that he didn't realize until he thought he had to leave. And he said the decision to leave was more about he felt like he had run his course at Pitt after 5 years. It certainly makes sense. He's been through some injuries. He's been buried on the depth chart, and I think while there was that emotional connection as well, I think he also does see an opportunity to play more and to play right away and to be a big factor on this team in 2024. It's interesting. There were not as many departures on from this team to the transfer portal as I expected there would be, and these guys are the first ones, and they are the highest profile ones to kind of answer for that. They're the first ones to kind of get into the nitty gritty a little bit, get into the details of, look, yes, this was, something that I was considering. This was a possibility for me. This was, not all sunshines and rainbows. This is kind of an ugly part of a bad season. And as you get to spring ball, it's not something that I think the program or the players and especially the coaches are not eager to address and to talk about. And it's a delicate thing when you've got to address it. So these guys giving some insight is pretty valuable. And I'm sure there's more to their stories. I'm sure they're not telling us every single detail of what their decision to leave or come back to Pitt was like. And obviously, the fact that they did come back skews our perspective of Pitt's ability to retain guys. Period, because there were guys who left, and we're not hearing their stories right now. But it is interesting to get some perspective from especially guys who are in position to be starters. Guys who were big contributors or could have been big contributors, and certainly could have had options to go elsewhere. It's interesting to hear about what made them decide that Pitt really was the place to stay. Moving on a little bit to some younger guys, we're going to stick on the defensive side of the ball. We're going to stick at Brandon George's position because he did mention one guy during his interview that has been impressing him, a true freshman, an early enrollee that I noticed just walking around the facility, the indoor facility during practice. Jeremiah Marcellin, he is excuse me, let me pull up my roster very quickly. True freshman linebacker. He is from Apalaca, Florida, went to Miami Norland Senior High School. I was just immediately struck by his size. I mean, I think he looks the part of a Power 5 starting linebacker already, and he is a true freshman. He is listed at 6'2" and 235 pounds on the roster. You look at him, and I would compare it to Shane Simon, and if you've seen Shane Simon up close, that guy was built. He had a lot of muscle on him, and Marcellin is not far off of that frame. You didn't get to see much of what Marcellin could do as an actual football player, but it kind of got my gears turning about that linebacker room, and how I think it could be pretty special moving forward. They have some great young talent there. Obviously Solomon Shields and Brandon George, they're kind of at the top of the depth chart right now. They're still maybe searching for one more guy to fill a starting role, but I love their depth, and I love the way that this unit has been recruited and built for the future. It's not just Marcellin, but it's Jordan Bass, it's Braylon Lovelace, it's Kyle Lewis, guys who got some starting experience last year, sort of out of necessity, just because Pitt suffered so many injuries at the position. But in a season where Pitt took their licks and during an ugly season where a lot went wrong for the Panthers, that was a pretty big bright spot. It's that Pitt has at least three linebackers that they feel really confident in. And there are even guys who really didn't see the field all that much that I think you can be really confident in as well. It's not just Bass and Lovelace and excuse me, Kyle Lewis, who saw the field right away, but this is a position that has been recruited well over the past couple of years. There was another member of please pardon me while I look over the roster. There was another true freshman last year who didn't see as much playing time right away alongside Jordan Bass, who had some great special teams moment in addition to making a start uh, at Rasheem Biles. Man, that is the name, Bass and Biles. I knew that it was some alliteration there that I was forgetting. Um, but there's tons of potential there. These guys are, I think of Biles and Bass as really great athletes. Obviously, Marcellin looks like he's built like a real thumper at middle linebacker right away. But then you got Lovelace and Lewis, who I think are good, are smart players. Maybe not the most physical guys you will ever see, especially at this point in their career. But they have good instincts. They know the playbook very well. They are kind of coaches' darlings in that way. Very cerebral players that maybe help them get onto the field a little bit quicker, especially considering that they are, not physical specimens in the same way that some other guys are. That maybe a Bengali Kamara who transferred out was. I just really like this group. I think there's a bright future there, and I think um, it was a linebacking unit that I think a couple years ago, if you had asked me, I was a little concerned about. You know, Kamara was coming along, but Solomon DeShields was a little bit unproven. Brandon George had been kind of a career backup, and there wasn't really much depth behind them. I think at one point, Pat Narduzzi told us that linebackers coach Brian Manelik was begging him to get some more bodies in there. He just needed guys to get there. And now it seems like they have plenty of guys. They're still a little young, but I think there's plenty to be excited about, and that's before you talk about Key Thompson, a graduate transfer, a former All-MAC linebacker who figures to fit in at one of those starting spots, if not just be a major contributor overall. And I want to wrap up with some notes on the quarterbacks. As I said, we went inside the indoor facility for practice today. I usually spend at least part of the half hour that we get watching practice, at least 5 or 6 or 7 minutes watching the quarterbacks throw. It's usually all on air. It's never against a defense or in a pass skeleton. I mean, I think even when we do get to see either 7-on-7 or 11-on-11 drills. It's pretty simple stuff. We're not really seeing quarterbacks get challenged, and when they're doing 11-on-11, a lot of the times it's running the ball. So, um, but as we step inside the indoor facility, you get to see some of the natural tools that a lot of these guys have. And after a rough first day out on the grass fields at the indoor facility, it they looked a lot better just as a whole quarterback unit, as a passing offense, running backs and receivers. Everyone looked more like they were on the same page. It seems like there is some progress and at least a little bit of kinks working out. There weren't as many drops, there weren't as many errant passes, and I was most impressed with Christian Bayer, because he has a really live arm. This guy probably is the best pure passer on the team. And he is a guy who will thrive and he will really impress you when he is throwing on air. And I suppose that's not really much of a surprise, but I bring that up not to really. I don't feel like I'm saying anything super groundbreaking there. Bayer, I think, is always the attractive thing about him was his arm, his ability to throw the deep ball. He always throws a nice spiral, and that kind of contrasts to Nate Yarnell, who I think's you know less I don't even know what the word is, less sexy mechanically, I guess I would say. I think he's a strong passer. I think he can make all of the necessary throws. It's just never as pretty necessarily. It's never always as tight a spiral as Vayers is. That's not really making an evaluation on him as a quarterback in game because I think you saw last year the decision making, the athleticism, the ability to run. Those were all factors in why Yarnell kind of put up some better results towards the end of the year in his last 2 games where he started, than Veyer, who made some questionable decisions at times, threw a bunch of interceptions. After that Louisville game, he did struggle a little bit. I think if you look statistically, his 4 games, his first 4 games, I believe it was 4 games, n- uh, compared to Phil Dracovich's 4 games to start the year. Statistically, they were almost identical. And as it's been well documented, Phil Dracovic was killed for his decision making, his inaccuracy, things like that. I just see a kind of similar dynamic to what we saw 2 years ago, when there was a competition between Keaton Slovis and Nick Patty. It's not a one-to-one comparison. Obviously, the Patty Slovis, that was a real competition. This is less of a competition. I think Yarnell's got to kind of defend his spot as QB1, but it's not necessarily an open competition. Pitt has declared that Yarnell's his top guy, their top guy, and it's more about holding his spot than uh, jockeying for a spot that no one holds yet. But Veyer, a much more highly touted recruit, a transfer guy with a really live arm. That sounds to me like Keaton Slovis, a guy who will impress you throwing the ball, throwing the deep ball, throwing on air, and then you step into a game, and obviously it's not the same thing. Meanwhile, in practice, a guy like a Nick Patty or a Nate Yarnell isn't wowing you with his throws on airs, but once he steps into a game, you see something different in terms of moxie, in terms of leadership, in terms of his ability to command a team and offense, and to lead. Um, and I think the Panthers have at certain times fallen in love with guys who are really nice passers, guys who really have the best arm, who can throw the deep ball, can make those big flashy plays, and it hasn't always led to the best results. Um, and then you bring in a Patty or a Yarnell, a guy who doesn't necessarily wow you with his ability to spin the ball or to chuck it deep. Those guys who maybe don't look as pretty with the way they throw the ball, end up giving you some better results because have command of the offense, because they know what they're doing. They make sound decisions, and those tend to be homegrown guys, guys who have been in the system for a while, who have learned, who have sat behind other guys who have been successful. Um, this isn't me making any evaluations of, oh well, you know, Christian Bayer is Keaton Slovis, or Nate Yarnell is Nick Patty. They are different players. This is a different situation, but I see some similarities here, and I think I start to see some hints at decision making processes for the Panthers when it comes to who's going to start at quarterback, who they like, what they're looking for. I just think it's notable that you know uh, the guy who has a little bit less experience, less in-game experience, but you can tell delivers them something in terms of athleticism, moxie, like I said, in command of the offense, was the guy that they rolled with this time instead of like in previous years. They rolled with the transfer, the guy who has the nice arm and looks good throwing that deep ball and you know looks nice when he's throwing on air in an indoor facility. And I think there's also something to be said for the difference between a transfer guy and a homegrown guy. The Panthers, I think, really kind of I think started to appreciate their homegrown guys a little bit more. Vayer's pretty close to a homegrown guy. He was only a sophomore when he came to Pitt, so I think Pitt feels like they have developed him as well. But I just found myself thinking about that, the kind of similarities between quarterback situation 2 years ago, quarterback situation now. Um, we'll see how it works out. I still do expect that Nate Yarnell is your starting quarterback in week one. Vayer's the logical backup. That seems like the right move. Um, I will also say, I mean, so first of all, Eli Holstein, you can see where the talent comes from. That was a guy who you're not shocked at all that he was recruited to play at an SEC, at a top SEC program, at one of the best programs in the country in Alabama. Um, but I also say don't forget about Julian Duggar. He's a guy who looks a little raw, but there's clearly some athleticism there. Obviously, you can watch that on film from when he was at Penn Hills, but he is a little bit of a better passer than I think most people give him credit for. I think he's just raw. This is a guy who, he's played quarterback a little bit, but I think he was trusted more to be an athlete and to kind of ad lib and make some plays on his own with his creativity. And I think it will take a minute for him to kind of warm up to being a true quarterback. But once he does, I think there's some potential there, and it's easy to see why Pitt was very eager to pick this guy up and why they feel that they have a little bit of a diamond in the rough in Julian Duggar. It was only a two-star recruit, so um, just some notes on the quarterback, some observations. Nothing I think is necessarily groundbreaking, but it's just interesting the way quarterback has been such a topic of conversation around this team because it has kind of made or broken how they've performed on the field. A lot of other facets of this team have stayed the same. They've been pretty consistent. The quarterback play has been up and down, and it's kind of reflected how the team as a whole has performed. So it's obviously something to keep an eye on, not just now, but in the future as well. But with that, I'm headed out of here. Thank you all so much for tuning into Inside the Panthers on YouTube. My name is Stephen Thompson. Thank you all for tuning in again. Like I said, please like this video, subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/at Inside the Panthers. Follow all the run reporting from spring ball and Pitt basketball as they try to make a push for the postseason at InsideThePanthers.com. Thank you all for tuning in, and I'll see you all